public media.
The Florida Theater presents The Steel Drivers. The Nashville-based bluegrass group known for challenging genre norms will be playing the Florida Theater stage Friday, March 28th at 8 p.m. Tickets and information is available at floridatheater.com. The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler. On today's First Coast Connect, from a surprisingly close special election to ways that new federal restrictions could impact voters, we get political analysis on all the recent headlines from attorney and government expert Chris Hand. Then a piano concerto brings a clang and a shudder to Jacoby Symphony Hall. We talk to the composer behind the arresting new creation. And the dreamy voice and definitive vision of Patsy Cline comes alive in the musical stylings of Patsy's Daydream. We talk to the local band leader ahead of their Saturday appearance. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. It's all ahead this hour after today's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. World leaders are gathering in Paris today for a summit on Ukraine. They'll lay the groundwork for long-term security guarantees. NPR's Eleanor Beardsley reports Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke beside French President Emmanuel Macron.
The two leaders held a joint press conference ahead of the summit where Macron announced $2 billion in additional military aid for Ukraine. He also said France will make the reinforcement of military and financial support for Ukraine its top priority. Today, around 30 countries will come together, including NATO allies, EU member states, and non-EU countries such as the UK, Canada, and Norway. They'll address the future format of the Ukrainian armed forces, and they reject Russian demands that Ukraine scale back its military in any peace deal. Overnight Thursday, Russian forces carried out a large-scale drone assault on Kharkiv, injuring 9 civilians and causing significant structural damage. Eleanor Beardsley, NPR News, Poltava, Ukraine.
Congressional Democrats are demanding more information from top Trump officials about a recent group chat on the commercial messaging app Signal. A journalist was inadvertently added to the chat. The officials talked about secret U.S. military strikes. Some of those officials in President Trump's cabinet have testified before House and Senate Intelligence Committees this week. NPR's Greg Myrie says some lawmakers want to know why they use the insecure messaging app.
Democrats say they'll keep pressing for details in this particular case, like whether national security officials have been using Signal for other chats, because, it's more convenient, though clearly not as secure as government communication networks.
NPR's Greg Myrie reporting. The Pentagon has said as far back as October 2023 that Signal should not be used for any kind of classified information. A note, NPR CEO Catherine Marr chairs the board of the Signal Foundation. It is a nonprofit that supports the messaging app. The Social Security Administration says it's revising a new policy that would have required some beneficiaries to prove their identity in person. NPR's Ashley Lopez reports agency officials say some people will now be exempted from that requirement.
Social Security officials say they have listened to concerns raised by beneficiaries, members of Congress, as well as advocates in the past week. Agency officials had announced that starting at the end of the month, people who cannot prove their identity using the agency's online system would be required to show up in person when seeking benefits or changing direct deposit information. But now, in a newly released statement, officials say they're delaying the policy for 2 weeks and they're exempting people who receive Medicare and disability benefits, as well as supplemental income help for the poor. The new identity requirements will only apply to retirement, survivor, or auxiliary benefits. Ashley Lopez, NPR News.
On Wall Street, Dow futures are down about 20 points. You're listening to NPR.
You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. There are two big town halls in Jacksonville this evening. The first is a meeting to discuss an ongoing drainage project in San Marco that will temporarily close parts of San Marco Boulevard and LaSalle Street in April and May. That meeting starts at 6 at the Ballas Community Center in the San Marco Library. The other is Mayor Donna Deegan's final budget town hall to discuss city spending and priorities ahead of budget season. The meeting is scheduled for 7 this evening at Terry Parker High School. A Florida Senate committee has struck down a proposal to allow guns on college campuses. The bill, sponsored by Republican Senator and U.S. congressional candidate for the 6th District, Randy Fine, failed to get enough yes votes this week after one Republican rejected the idea. Fine told the panel that college students have the right to protect themselves in emergency situations.
You have the right to defend yourself, and that right doesn't go away because you walked onto a college campus.
Tuesday's decision temporarily stops the bill from moving forward, yet in another gun-related measure which aims to lower the state's gun purchasing age from 21 to 18. Well, that measure passed the state House yesterday, but it remains to be seen if the Senate will take up the issue. It's going to be a beautiful day here in Northeast Florida. We're going to have highs reaching the upper 70s to lower 80s for inland areas, and then the lower 70s along the coast. We'll have plenty of sunshine and breezy conditions as well. Tonight, mostly clear. Lows will drop down into the 50s for inland areas, lower 60s near the coast.
Support for NPR comes from the Skoll Foundation, dedicated to powering social innovators to transform the world. Learn more at skoll.org. And Jarl and Pamela Mohn, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, a last-minute scramble over a special congressional election. We examine the surprisingly close District 6 contest between Republican Randy Fine and Democrat Josh Weil. Later in the program, the Jacksonville Symphony debut of an acclaimed pianist's specially commissioned concerto. But first, we're joined, as we are each month, by local government expert and attorney Chris Hand. Chris, good morning.
Good morning, Ann.
It's wonderful to have you here, and there is so much to talk about as ever. But let's start, if we can, with this special election. Competitive in a way that nobody really expected in a reliably red district. It kind of includes southern St. Johns County and portions south there.
Competitive in a not competitive seat, Ann, and just not to put too fine a point on it, but this was a district that President Trump won by 30 percentage points in November, just a few months ago during the presidential election. And now there is new polling, Florida Politics publication, statewide online publication commissioned a poll from St. Pete Polls, which has shown this race potentially within the margin of error. It showed the Republican candidate Randy Fine with 48% and his opponent Josh Weil with 44%. So a surprisingly close race, one in which the Democratic candidate, and this is, again, not something that typically happens in this district, has raised about $10 million to just over $500,000 for the Republican candidate. Look, the odds still very much favor the Republican winning this seat. It's just a very kind of Republican-leaning seat. But the fact that it is so close and so competitive is causing people around the country to take notice and pay very close attention to what the final results will be next Tuesday, April the 1st, when voters go to the polls.
And you note an enormous amount of money already being spent on this race. I'm interested if we know kind of where the Democratic money is coming from. And then also, I guess we're learning that even just this week, the GOP has really stepped up its efforts to infuse some cash, including from Elon Musk, into the Republican side of this contest.
Well, it's interesting. We're seeing this phenomenon in both special congressional elections in Florida, and there are two here, Congressional District 6, as you say, which includes parts of Central and Northeast Florida. This is the seat that National Security Advisor Mike Walz previously held before he took that position in the administration. His departure from Congress opened that, and it's created the race we're talking about. There's also a contest going on in the Panhandle, the 1st Congressional District. This was the seat that Matt Gaetz previously occupied before he resigned from Congress. Two candidates there. The Republican is the chief financial officer of Florida, Jimmy Patronis. This is one where there's less concern on the Republican side because this is an even more Republican district, sort of a plus 37 Republican district, but also one where you're seeing a significant financial disparity. The one in that race, the Republican has raised about $1 million, the Democrat about $6 million.
Wow.
I haven't done a full analysis of where these contributions are coming from, but I suspect what you're seeing is a lot. These special elections are ways for Democrats around the country, particularly low-dollar Democratic donors around the country, to express some of the frustration they're feeling right now about the direction of the Trump administration, direction of the company, maybe even frustration at their own leaders in Congress, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks. There aren't as many ways to do that in March of an odd-numbered year. These particular special elections have proved to be a vehicle for people to, get engaged through their contributions. I suspect we'll see this even more a little bit later this year in a special congressional election in New York. Elise Stefanik, who's a member from New York, is going to be leaving Congress to take the job of United Nations ambassador. Her nomination is still pending. That's a much closer congressional district than the ones in Florida, so we're likely to see that phenomenon there as well. But in an odd-numbered year, there just aren't that many opportunities for voters and donors to get involved. The two special elections here in Florida are two of those rare opportunities, so you're seeing a lot of engagement both in the district, in the state, and around the country.
So Randy Fine, who's the Republican in this race, he's still a state senator. He serves as the chair of the Committee on Governmental Oversight and Accountability. He had a hearing yesterday. He actually sounded like maybe he was a little bit grumpy. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
You're done too. Next, 30 seconds.
Yeah, 30 seconds is disgusting.
Yeah, well, yeah. Enjoy your terrorist rag. Come on, let's go. You're next.
Whoa.
I'm the chairman. I can say what I want. If you don't like it, you can leave. Come on. You're next.
You get paid by us.
I'll clear the room, and then we can move on if I hear one more outburst. I don't have to have any of you sit here. One more. I'll clear the room, we'll debate, and we'll vote.
So he was at that point kind of earning some boos from people in the audience. He was addressing a speaker who was wearing this traditional Middle Eastern headdress kind of around his shoulders, called it a terrorist rag. He has been getting a lot of pushback from Republicans because of his lack of fundraising and perhaps lack of, urgency on the campaign trail. And so people being quoted off the record talking about, wishing that he was doing more, that they wanted him to be more involved, but they didn't ultimately think that he was going to lose this.
I think the consensus is, again, just because of how the district is drawn, how the Republican advantage in voter registration, he's likely to win. But you are pointing out, Ann, an interesting phenomenon that we're seeing right now. If this race is closer than expected, and closer than expected would be really anything less than that 30% margin that Donald Trump won. And, of course, Mike Walz was reelected by a similar margin. When Governor Ron DeSantis represented this district in Congress, or a very similar district, he typically won by very significant margins in the general election. I think one of the strategies you're seeing around the country is what Republicans don't want is this interpreted as somehow a commentary on President Trump and his first, 60 days in office at this point. And I think there will be an effort, if this race or the one in the Panhandle runs closer, to suggest that means the Trump administration is in some political trouble. And frankly, polling suggests that may be the case. A lot of what's happening right now is unpopular. But we already see sort of a circling of the wagons effect here, where a variety of people nationally are saying, no, this isn't about President Trump. This is about a candidate who hasn't run as an effective a campaign as he can, hasn't raised as much money as he can. So you're already seeing fingers pointed at the Republican candidate, Randy Fine, not just for a potential loss, but a potential win that is less overwhelming than expected. There's clear effort trying to make sure that this is not painted as about President Trump, but about a candidate they feel like who has not been as productive as he could be.
And certainly the governor has joined that conversation. He's been pointing out that he won that district by the same wide margin that President Trump won it by. And he actually said this is not a reflection of President Trump. It's a reflection of a specific candidate running in that race. saying it was a huge underperformance.
Well, and I think also worth pointing out there is no love lost between Governor DeSantis and Randy Fine. They've had a complicated relationship for much of the time they've been in Tallahassee together. Senator Fine was a DeSantis supporter until during the presidential campaign he very sort of publicly broke with the governor and joined the Trump campaign. So again, this is
And he has been endorsed by Trump.
correct, yeah, and had multiple messages come from President Trump sort of supporting his campaign. But I think when you've seen some of that commentary from around the country, one of the themes you've seen is that, again, that there's concern that there hasn't been enough fundraising, there hasn't been enough activity, and the Trump political machine is having to get involved. I think one of the quotes was to sort of drag the candidate across the finish line. And so we'll see kind of what the final result is. I think one thing that seems clear at this point is it's going to be significantly closer than it was in November, which in a district that is this leaning this much toward one particular party is a surprising result. And people around the country will attempt to interpret that in a variety of ways.
Could be a win that's kind of seen as a loss.
Right.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Chris Hand. He joins us every month to talk about the latest state and local headlines, and you can join our conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on social media. Got a call from Wells on the south side. Good morning, Wells. Go ahead.
Good morning, Ann. Good morning, Ann and Chris. I was in that chamber Tuesday. It was packed with people who, for one of the pieces of legislation, there were a number of them, but one of those pieces was to protect Confederate statues. And Randy Fine, he had to leave, but he was very disrespectful to the Floridians who were in that chamber. We ran the clock out on them, so they could not vote to push this piece of legislation forward. So they want to protect Confederate statues. They would like to put them back up. And I just want to say I'm going to be at the IBEW Hall tonight to see the movie Union because I am a retired union member of two different unions. And I want to say this last thing about Randy Fine. I wanted to ask him, and I wanted to say to him that he's a believer in the false ideology of white supremacy. And I want him to know that that's what I'm saying about him when I speak about him. I want to thank you.
Thanks, Wells. It was a contentious meeting. We know that he was limiting speakers to about 30 seconds, and so that never goes over very well when people have traveled all the way to Tallahassee to have their voices heard. But I want to move on, if we can, to some voter changes that have been some proposed, some that have been approved at the state and the local level, starting with some changes that state lawmakers want to make to alter the ballot initiative process. What's going on there?
Well, as you know, Ann, in recent years, there has been an effort from a variety of perspectives to change the way Floridians can actually sort of propose and adopt amendments to the Florida Constitution. This started as far back as 2006. It used to be that we wanted to pass a constitutional amendment in the state. It was a simple majority, 50% plus one. In 2006, there was an amendment on the ballot that elevated that standard from 50% plus one to 60% plus one. So that's been the law, essentially since 2007. There's been concern, particularly by legislators over time, that there are too many amendments, that maybe that process needs to be reformed. So there are some proposed changes this year that would make it harder, and this is in keeping with other changes that have been adopted in recent years, that make it harder to circulate and collect petitions for placing a constitutional amendment on the ballot. Remember, there are two ways under the state constitution to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot. The legislature can do so directly with a supermajority vote of both houses of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and citizens can do so themselves by circulating petitions, going through a Supreme Court review process, and then ultimately having voters choose that. Now, that is the one way citizens have under the Constitution to directly affect the laws. Obviously, we live in a representative democracy, so people can elect their leaders and advocate to their leaders. But in terms of directly affecting the course of Florida law, the best way citizens can do that through the constitutional amendment process. So these proposed changes have generated significant controversy by citizens who've said, look, there are already restrictions on our ability to do this. Why would we want to change this any further? People who have advocated for some of these changes, which include things like having to post $1 million bond if you're a petition gatherer, limiting petition collection and gathering to Florida residents, requiring sort of verification of signatures from the supervisor of elections, and a variety of other things. Those who are critics of that say, look, a lot of these changes aren't needed. The system's sort of already working. In fact, case in point, two very popular amendments didn't make it into the state constitution last fall because of that 60% standard. And the critics are saying this is taking away a right that we have to put things on the ballot. Proponents are saying, look, there's opportunities for fraud in this process or other ways to interfere with the election process. We've got to streamline them and minimize the number of people from out of state who are involved in this process. But this is a bill that is moving through the legislature right now.
Is this a territorial type issue for lawmakers who just would prefer to make the laws themselves? Or is there some evidence that there has been fraud or, issues of concern in previous amendment efforts?
I don't think there's been widespread consensus that there have been some of these challenges in past elections. I mean, the Florida elections process, for the most part, has generally gotten very good reviews in sort of recent years. And again, I mean, last year's election being a good example, there were multiple constitutional amendments on the ballot. The two most high profile were Amendment 3, which would have legalized small amounts of recreational marijuana, and Amendment 4, which would have restored kind of a reproductive rights, abortion rights to the Florida Constitution. Those were both very popular, passed with more than a majority support, but are not part of the Florida Constitution because they did not reach that 60% threshold. So I think the concern on the part of some is that this is sort of an over belt and suspenders approach to dealing with this process that might limit the ability of citizens to engage in the process. So we'll have to watch this, but I think that's certainly a question that's going to be asked as this bill goes through. What's the evidence that this is actually a problem? What impact might this have on citizens' ability to affect their own constitution? And we'll have to track that as this bill moves through the process.
At the federal level, there are also some changes. Donald Trump signed an executive action on Tuesday that are going to have some impacts on basically people who are trying to register to vote, including requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote. That's basically what, like a passport, a birth certificate?
Well, it could be a variety of things. It could be a passport. Remember, about half of Americans do not have passports. It could be what's called Real ID, which most of us have here in the state of Florida, ID that's been issued after a driver's license agency has reviewed proof of citizenship, like a birth certificate. It could be a birth certificate. There are large numbers of citizens out there. The Brennan Center for Justice at New York University did a study a couple of years ago. I think it was up to about 20% of citizens of voting age don't have ready access to some of those proofs of citizenship, whether it's a birth certificate or a passport or Real ID. Here in Florida, most of us have Real ID. It's mandatory to have it.
Is that sort of part of our driver's license?
Exactly right. But in many states, that is not mandatory. And so you have large numbers of people who might have driver's licenses, but they are not what's called Real ID compliant. So I think there's a variety. After President Trump issued this executive order, there was a variety of concerns. Of course, one of the things he said in the executive order was, I'm going to ban anyone from registering to vote who, doesn't have proof of citizenship. I think one reason you're going to see a court challenge to this is because the Constitution makes it very clear that states, not the federal government, are the level of government that oversee election, particularly the time, place, and manner of elections. Congress can regulate, of course, federal elections, and there is a bill pending in Congress called the SAVE Act, which would, impose a similar citizenship requirement. And of course, right now, most states do require some form of identification to actually go vote, to kind of cast your ballot. So again, President sort of wading into an area that traditionally the courts have said Congress can regulate federal elections, but the states regulate their own elections. Also in the executive order he issued was a mandate that all ballots be received by Election Day. Right now, most states do that, but there are 18 states plus Puerto Rico that if your ballot is postmarked by Election Day and received during a period thereafter, it counts. Again, the Constitution's been pretty clear, and courts have been clear in enforcing that in the past, that states regulate that time, place, and manner of elections, and that's not in the purview of federal government. So, again, another executive order that's been issued, but there are going to be a lot of questions about its legality, and it's certainly going to have a judicial challenge.
Um, the city council had some big movement in the last week or so, and I want to start with a legal issue that they've been looking at, which is their own general counsel, the attorney that represents both the city council and then the office that basically represents. Well, I'll let you explain it because it is an unusual situation for an attorney, kind of how they represent the city. But explain to us what happened, what the council voted for.
Sure, and just to remind people, we have a unique Office of General Counsel. Obviously, City of Jacksonville and Duval County consolidated in 1968, and one of the reforms that came out of consolidation was rather than having each different arm of city government have its own attorney, they are all represented by the same law firm, for lack of a better term. That's the Office of General Counsel. It's one of the largest public law firms in the state, if not the country, among cities. And the Office of General Counsel represents everyone in consolidated government. So the mayor's a client, the city council's a client, each of the 5 constitutional officers and the school board is a client, the independent authorities are a client. Well, and in addition to representing clients, the general counsel has what's called binding legal authority. So if there is a conflict between or among different City of Jacksonville agencies, the general counsel operates sort of as a quasi-judge and can sort of make rulings about this is what city law is, and those rulings are definitive. There has been controversy over the last year or two where city council, and this is, by the way, this is not the first time a city council has expressed concern about this related to a general counsel. You've seen it in multiple periods in our city's history. They believe the general counsel, they've argued that the general counsel is not independent, that he's biased in favor of the mayor, that he's making rulings that lean too much in favor of the mayor, and they, as a result, they had this no confidence resolution to suggest that he wasn't sufficiently independent. That passed with an 11-6 vote the other night. Again, this is not an uncommon sort of charge that's been made against general counsels in the past. By nature of their role, general counsels spend a lot of time with the mayor's office and the executive departments that represent the mayor because they run the day-to-day kind of roles of city government. The flashpoint here was something we talked about in one of our last conversations, Ann, was a ruling on Meridian Waste and its contract and a ruling about separation of powers that concerned a number of members of general counsel. They introduced this no confidence resolution, and it passed. Now, just to be clear, this is non-binding. It has no force and effect whatsoever. The charter does have a provision by which both a mayor and a city council can remove a general counsel through a supermajority vote. But this was not that. This was a non-binding resolution expressing concern of the city council that the general counsel was insufficiently independent.
And so you notice that this was something that has, been part of an ongoing kind of series of disagreements between the Deacon administration and the council. I want to take a listen to one of her more vocal opponents, is Councilmember Rory Diamond, who represents the Beaches. He was talking here to our partners at News for Jax.
Everybody likes Mr. Fackrell. I'm sure he's a very good lawyer, but he's lost the trust and confidence of his most important client, the Jacksonville City Council. So you simply can't keep doing that job if your client doesn't want you there. I believe that he's the mayor's lawyer and that he's doing whatever the mayor asks and not what the law requires or what city council might want. And you can't have an office of general counsel that is just essentially the lapdog of the mayor. And so I just can't accept that.
So, Chris, is there something to that? I mean, if a client doesn't trust their attorney, presumably they would get rid of their attorney. Now, obviously, this was non-binding, as you say. It didn't get a majority even of votes. But what action is possible for a city council member who doesn't feel like they're getting adequate representation from their attorney?
Well, there is again, and this is different than other attorney situations because, again, this is prescribed. There's a process prescribed in the charter for how a general counsel is selected and then how they can ultimately be removed. I mean, look, ultimately, I think it's probably a concerning situation for any attorney when a client, particularly one that's a significant client as the city council, does vote to express this lack of confidence and independence. There can't be a removal, at least from the council side, unless, they can get a very significant number of votes, 15 votes, and that has to be based on a claim of, of malfeasance or misfeasance or an actual sort of violation of the law. So there's a very high bar actually for removal. I think what'll be important to track at this point is, are there efforts made to try and kind of help remedy this relationship going forward? Council has expressed its resolution. From their standpoint, has the ship truly sailed? And council does have the ability to go out and hire its own independent legislative counsel. Now, that counsel ultimately reports up to the general counsel, but council does have has the ability to hire its own legislative counsel, which is permitted. It'll be interesting to see if they kind of pursue that path. Also be interesting to see if there is an effort to sort of remedy this relationship going forward. But again, the bar to actually remove a general counsel under our charter is very high. It involves 15 votes only under certain circumstances. And after this vote on Tuesday, the mayor made it clear she supports Mr. Fackler. There doesn't seem to be any movement at the moment toward a change in that position. And for council to do it in an involuntary fashion, that would be a very high bar.
So some of the council members expressed concern that this could be a problem down the road, that this might send a message to future general counsels. Can you kind of explain what that concern might be?
Well, I think the one concern I heard was said publicly by Councilman Matt Carlucci, who essentially said, look, if we do this and we sort of force a general counsel to resign because we sort of disagree with their opinion, will that have a chilling effect on people who might want to hold the job of general counsel in the future? Look, it's a very difficult job, general counsel, because you are having to balance the interests of all of these different kind of parts of city government. And there are some times you have to make some very tough calls. I think a lot of that, probably the most effective general counsels over time, and Judge William Durden was the first one after consolidation. There's been a number of others. I think the most effective general counsels have been effective because they've been very good at communicating with, managing clients, trying to make sure they stay ahead of issues, that council members or other clients feel like they're accessible and they hear from them. So I think that's always a best practice for any lawyer in general. A good practice is stay in close touch with your clients, make sure they're aware of potential issues, make sure they know you're kind of proactively working on solutions. And I think that's the most effective general counsels have been really good at managing those client relationships, making sure that no one is ever surprised. I think that's been one of the concerns expressed here, that council members were surprised at times by some of the OGC's opinions. So there are some best practices, but even in the best cases of scenarios, many general counsels have been subject to the claim that they favor, one branch of city government over the other. This isn't the first time we've heard this charge.
I want to dial back for just a moment with a question that we got on Facebook. It has to do with the proof of citizenship. And she's asking specifically about like a marital name change, whether women would need to bring a marriage license and a birth certificate if they've changed their names and they're trying to get proof of citizenship.
Yeah, that's actually been one of the concerns expressed about this potential executive order, which again is going to be challenged in court just because some of the constitutional issues I talked about. But, if someone is married and they change their name, suddenly the name that's on some of their documents, or maybe even on their voter registration card, is going to be different than it is in some of those, their birth certificate and those kinds of things. So that is a concern that has been raised, how that is going to be sort of worked out over time if you have some of these rules in place. I know also a concern for elections officials around the country who have to manage this process. So we'll see more about that, but that has been a very important concern raised.
All right. If you're just joining us, we're talking to Chris Hand. He is a local government, state government, actual all-around government expert. He's an attorney here in Jacksonville, and he joins us once a month to help explain the nuances of what's going on behind the headlines. You can join our conversation at 904-549-2937, or you can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. I do want to move on now to the issue of a rate hike at JEA. That's the city's municipal water and electric utility. This is coming at a time of a lot of concerns about inflation. What do we know about why this is coming now and what customers of the utility can expect?
Well, JEA has said, and earlier this week, the board unanimously voted to increase rates. It'll be about 4% rate increase in 2025, maybe about 5% in 2026. And, JEA said they need to do this to kind of handle the cost of operations, that particularly some of their plant building and management, because of different federal regulations, has become more expensive. Other prices have gone up, so they have to pass this on to the customer. Obviously, this is not going to be popular with JEA ratepayers, particularly given continuing inflation, perhaps even some enhanced inflation now because of some of what's happened in the last several months involving tariffs and other factors as well. So it's going to be very sort of unpopular. And I think we're going to see more discussion about this going forward, because there's going to be a couple of vehicles for that discussion, particularly before the Jacksonville City Council. And as you know, just several weeks ago, the mayor's office announced they had reached a new accord with JEA. JEA each year, because JEA is a publicly owned utility, doesn't pay property taxes. So instead of that, they each year pay a payment in lieu of property taxes to the city of Jacksonville. And that's always a subject of negotiation and debate. That payment is going to go up significantly. From this year, it's about $124 million. Next year, it'll be $137 million. And in addition to that, JEA is going to give the city an additional $40 million in this first year of what is a long-term agreement, about a 5-year agreement with the city. So there's a significant amount of money coming from JEA to the agreement. I think we've already seen some council members raise questions about this and whether there's a relationship between that and the rate hike. For example, this $40 million that JEA, this additional $40 million they're giving to the city this year, about $36 million of that is because JEA refinanced some debt, was able to generate some money from that. Also, some enhanced revenues that JEA got from sales over the last year was about the other $4 million. So I suspect there's going to be some questions now if JEA had this extra money to give to the city, why did they not use that instead to try and sort of mitigate rates for JEA ratepayers? Again, JEA may have very plausible explanations for that, but it is going to be, I think, a source of debate before the city council as we get into budget season and they begin to process this new JEA agreement.
And so you were saying, the rate increased 4% this year and then an additional 5% in fiscal year 2026. I think that they've estimated that would increase the average person's total bill, from about $205 to about $221. And it's, something that does tend to raise people's hackles when they do raise these rates. But, this is something that the mayor has said is going to be part of her configured budget estimates. I mean, we've talked previously about how this is a lower revenue year for the city and that they're going to have to be doing some belt tightening. Does this additional revenue from JEA make a measurable difference in that calculation?
It could, and we don't know what the latest council auditor projections. The city is almost definitely going to run a deficit of some kind this year. Last July, the city council auditor's office projected about an $80 million deficit for this year. And, the extra money from JEA could certainly help mitigate whatever that final deficit is. And just to be clear, this is not something the current mayor's office invented. Multiple administrations over time have sought more money from JEA, which is the city's own utility. So I don't want to leave the misimpression that this is the first time that a mayor has done this. Multiple administrations over time have sought more money from JEA. The timing might be a little tricky this time because of the money coming in and the JEA rate hike. But yeah, and I suspect that's part of the reason the administration tried to negotiate this extra money was to help mitigate some of this budget deficit the city's likely to face. Having been at City Hall during a 4-year period, 2011 to 2015, where the city really struggled with revenue, there are very painful choices that have to be made during those periods in terms of cuts of services. So it's traditional for administrations to try and find other sources of revenue that might help to sort of alleviate some of those potential cuts.
I want to take a call from John in St. John's. Good morning, John. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. My question is in regards to the rate increase, or at least the proposed. I live in St. John's, and JEA serves St. John's, substantial space in St. John's, and that area is growing by leaps and bounds. So my question is, with that increase in revenue, and also in relation to the increases in salaries, especially the chief executive officer, which I believe they approved $750,000 of salary. If JEA have a rate increase for their expenses and salaries across the board, how that is affecting their revenue and expenses, and if that justifies their rate hike.
Thanks, John. And we've got just about a minute left, Chris.
Well, I think that's a question that will probably get some attention during this council process. The question that that John has raised. Another one might be, one of the justifications JEA gave for this rate hike is that they're having to do it because of tighter federal regulations among kind of their power plant construction and maintenance. If those rules change in a new administration, does that alleviate some of those concerns? So again, I think we have not heard the last of the discussion on this rate hike. As this process moves to city council, we're going to hear a lot more.
Chris Hand, thank you so much for being here. It's always a delight to talk to you.
Good to see you as always. See you next month, Ann.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Up next, First Coast Connect producer Stacey Bennett had an opportunity to sit down with the composer of a new piano concerto ahead of its world premiere at the Jacksonville Symphony Orchestra.
Welcome back. Conrad Tao, Jacksonville Symphony's current artist in resident, is making his return to Jacoby Hall April 4th and 5th to perform the world premiere of his new work, Clang and Shudder. A world-renowned pianist and composer, Conrad Tao joins us now by video. Conrad, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, happy to be here.
I'm also joined in studio by friend of the show and music director for the Jacksonville Symphony Orchestra, Courtney Lewis. Courtney, hi.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Glad to have you back. Conrad, I'm going to start with you. You are known for blending traditional and classical music with innovative approaches. What was your creative process like when composing Clang and Shudder for the Jacksonville Symphony?
The first sound that kind of opened this piece up is the first sound that you hear in the piece, which is these chords at the piano. And I think the image in my mind was like a child banging at a piano. And so these opening chords are like, I guess you could almost call them naive. They're really iconic chords. They're really familiar, and they start from the piano's middle C. And I think I was just imagining like that childish impulse to bang at the piano. And I wanted to see if I could find like what was true about that and what was lyrical about that. And I wanted to kind of tease that out. And so that was really the starting point. And then the piece grew from there, and other feelings and trajectories came out of that. But that was the seed, was just like a child banging at it at the keyboard.
Yeah, there is this sense of onomatopoeia that's happening. And it sounds very basic, but you've been playing piano for so long, yet you're still experimenting with it. Are you still discovering it in some ways?
All the time. I mean, I think I wrote about this in my composer note. Like when I was thinking about this image of a child and reflecting on the feelings that I was trying to follow, it reminded me of when I get down in a YouTube rabbit hole watching animal videos, and it reminded me of like when I watch puppies play with like doorstops, and or when I watch animals playing musical instruments. There's this kind of raw feedback loop of responding to the object that is providing you stimuli that you are also feeding into, just this beautiful full circle of output and input and inspiration and curiosity. And I think that that's just always an animating force in my life, and certainly in my work.
Courtney, what excites you most about the premiere of Clang and Shudder?
Well, it's always really exciting to play a new piece at any point, but it's a particular treat to be doing it with the composer actually playing the solo part. And also, Conrad and I have done a lot of stuff together now, and he's been to the Jacksonville Symphony many times. So there's an element of partnership that there isn't always with the composer when you're doing a piece that he or she is not actually performing in, which is very exciting. but also having our audience share in this is also something very exciting. And it's in a program which is accompanied by two really iconic masterpieces, Debussy's Nocturne and Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. So having I think it's fair to call it a reasonably modernist concerto, would you say, Conrad? It's trying to do something new. It's trying to mold materials into a fresh piece. It's well situated between those two other works.
Yeah, and how does it complement it?
Well, despite those two pieces being, as I said, iconic pieces of modernism, they're also really well known. So it's nice to, for once, have the pieces that are usually seen as the modernist pieces, the modern pieces, being the 100-year-old pieces, with a new modern piece by Conrad in the middle.
Conrad, this is not your first rodeo with the Jacksonville Symphony. You've been working with them on several projects. What has been the best part about working with the symphony?
At this point, it's just been such a nice relationship over the years. I first played with the Jacksonville Symphony when I was very early in my career, and still, like, I think maybe I was 16 or 17 the first time I ever came to the orchestra. And then several years later, I came back and worked with Courtney for the first time just a few years ago. And since then have been back multiple times and have gotten to know Courtney and the whole team in Jacksonville. And so it's a great orchestra, it's a great team, it's a great hall. There's really what's not to like. So it's been a really wonderful, positive relationship at this point.
Right. And while you're in town, you're also hosting a masterclass for young musicians. What can the students expect to learn, and what do you hope to learn from in return?
Well, when I'm working with pianists, my interest is pretty much always in uniting the physical experience of playing the instrument with all of the questions of meaning that come up in music. So how can we unite the literal bodily experience of playing with the questions of drama and narrative and poetry that come up in music all the time? Like, why is this object here and this object is here? And how do we physically maneuver to get there, and why, and what does that mean? And so that's what I love to do when I'm working with pianists, working with performers and instrumentalists. And you're always learning from that as well, because everyone's bodies are different and everyone's going to filter meaning a little bit differently as well. So there is just this constant back and forth.
Very cool. Courtney, how do world premieres like this shape the symphony's artistic vision, and how does it reflect the evolving landscape of contemporary classical music?
That's a wonderful question. One of my core beliefs as a musician and as a conductor is that classical music has to be reflective of the time that we live in. It can't be a museum piece from the past. It's got to be music from today as well. So having a concerto written by a performer that the audience has a relationship with and that's brand new is really special, because it means that the Jacksonville Symphony and our audience is part of creating new works for the future. And that's exactly where I feel we should be. It also means that the repertoire the orchestra has is not just from the past, but also from the music of today.
I'm going to leave you guys with one final question. What do you hope the audience takes away from this experience?
I hope they feel part of the creation of a new piece of art, which is one of the most exciting things you can experience in a concert.
And for me, one alternative title for this piece is Piano Concerto in C major. And I think I wanted to write a piece that infused this familiar idea of C major and some very, very familiar sounds with a kind of fuzziness and wildness and messiness. And so I hope that people pick up a little bit of that and maybe carry it with them outside of the concert hall.
Wonderful. Well, it was great having you guys. April 4th and 5th.
That's right.
Tickets still available?
Yes.
And jacksymphony.org.
Correct.
Thank you guys so much for being here. Conrad Tao, Courtney Lewis, anytime.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we will be right back.
On the next Fresh Air, Syria may be on the verge of a new era of unity, or it may descend into anarchy, and the outcome will affect the Middle East and the U.S. Syria's transitional president founded the Syrian branch of al-Qaeda, but he's now preaching inclusivity. We'll talk with Robert Worth of The Atlantic about his reporting. Join us.
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
Conspiracy theorists believe more than $400 billion of gold at Fort Knox is missing. President Trump is pumping up those conspiracies when he says,
"We're going to go to Fort Knox, the fabled Fort Knox, to make sure the gold is there."
well, it is there. And so is the very real economic uncertainty that's sending gold prices stratospheric. We'll talk about America's gold obsession. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
All presidencies face challenges at home and abroad. Since Donald Trump took office in January, Israel has resumed its attacks on Gaza, ending the 2-month ceasefire, and he's recast our long-standing agreement to protect European allies. Join us next time in front of a live audience as we speak to 3 leading international journalists about how they're covering the Trump administration for their audiences back home.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, Jacksonville-based band Patsy's Daydream is rooted in the music of a legendary country act, but with a modern, ethereal sound. Here to tell us about the band's upcoming performance on the WJCT soundstage is singer, songwriter, and bassist Tiana DeSalvo. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ann.
It's so nice to be here. Of course, we're listening to a little of your music there. We'll hear some more at the end. This band is sort of inspired by Patsy Cline.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your relationship to her and her music.
Well, my whole life, my hanging out with my parents, they're super old school. My mom, she loved Johnny Cash and June Carter, and my dad, he loves that 40s, 30s like big band era, and he would pick me up in his hot rod on the way to Catholic school and playing all those old classic tunes, and my mom taking me to soccer practice or softball. She was always playing the old country tunes, and she sort of introduced me to Willie Nelson and that whole era of singer-songwriters that just sort of made a profound impact on me really early on. And
Sure.
I discovered Patsy Cline kind of on my own. My mom gave me this Johnny Cash, June Carter CD when I moved here to go to college, and I listened to it pretty much every day on the way to school, on the way to go surf. And I sort of discovered Patsy through Johnny Cash and June, and just sort of fell in love with her sound and her story. She's a huge deal for women in every musical industry, really. She sort of set the stage for women in music. First woman to be inducted at the Country Music Hall of Fame. First woman to headline a show in Vegas, play Carnegie Hall.
Wow.
Yeah, she's a badass.
Yeah, yeah, and an extraordinary voice. You really kind of channel her in your performances, and your voice is also that kind of
Thank you.
lovely, incredibly melodic,
Thank you.
and faithful to her sound. But you branch out and you kind of push her legacy in sort of a different direction. So
Thank
what
you.
is the conceit in your mind of Patsy's Daydream?
Oh, goodness. Well, I just think that old time feeling era of music is almost lost, and I wanted to hear it again and see it again, or and feel it again. So I'm so privileged to be able to play music with my friends and bring that out to live for people to see again.
And your music is obviously very much appreciated and celebrated here. You were named one of your songs, the one that we were listening to actually just at the beginning there, was selected by the Jacksonville Music Experience on their list of the best songs of 2024. So it's a great thing that you're going to be performing here as part of the Jacksonville Music Experience soundstage series.
I'm so honored to get to play here. What a special venue.
And this
guys
is
have
your
here.
first time on the stage here?
First time, yeah, and I'm so excited.
Yeah. And so what is it that people, I mean, you're going to be one of several bands that night.
Mhm.
What is it that you're going to be performing? And what time do you guys get rolling?
Doors are at 6, and Patsy's Daydream goes on at 7 p.m. We're going to be playing with a 10-piece band.
Wow.
That night, and some of my favorite players are going to get to be on stage with me, and some of my very best friends. And I feel so lucky and so excited to open up for Levitation Room, and those guys are just the coolest and the grooviest. And then Ben Katzman, he'll be direct support too, and he's a Florida local as well, and he's just a nut job. So I'm really excited to see his set. He's like really punk rock-esque, and then Levitation Room, they're just super dreamy and kind of 60s Kinks, Donnie Emerson-esque. They're so groovy. I'm super excited to see both of their sets too.
And you're performing kind of with that big band sound.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We'll have Mr. Philip Pan on the fiddle and violin, and then Landon Gay from Howdy. He's going to be playing the pedal steel with us.
Nice.
And I'll have the Humphrey brothers, Jack and Ben, playing harmonica and keys. And my roommates, Jenna and Jimmy, they're going to be singing with me and doing backup vocals. And then my friend Sean Ryan and Presto, they'll be on guitar. And I'll be on the bass and singing. So.
Well, let's do this. Let's take a listen to that song, The Butterfly in the Valley. Tiana DeSalvo of Patsy's Daydream. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's good to meet you.
Yeah, you as well. And that's our show. Of course, there are a couple other shows for the JME series. Shannon and the Clams on April 12th, Ghost Funk Orchestra on May 2nd. Thanks for listening. If you have comments or questions, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And please join us tomorrow when we talk about the week's headlines, from a local immigration crackdown to loosening child labor laws. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. The Jacksonville Symphony presents Take 6 on March 29th. A cappella jazz, R&B, and gospel vocals blend with the full power of the Jacksonville Symphony live in Jacoby Symphony Hall. Tickets available at jacksymphony.org.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
What is it like to cover an administration that talks to world leaders like this?
With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
From WAMU and NPR in Washington, this is 1A. I'm Jen White. The president's early months have already had major implications for countries across the globe, from tariffs to ceasefires to deportations. How do these countries view us right now? And how do their journalists bring these stories home? With us today, 3 leading foreign journalists covering the Trump administration and its policies towards the Middle East, Europe, and Latin America. It's a special show here in Washington, D.C. in front of a live studio audience. And as always, we're taking your questions and thoughts. Email us at 1a@wamu.org.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. The Department of Health and Human Services is now the latest federal agency to announce big layoffs. The